Welcome to episode 4 of Into the Forest with Pine. Let's just start off talking about introducing yourself and tell us what you do and kind of how you got to where you are.
Totally. Okay, thanks for having me first, Jack. It's a pleasure to be here and to be a guest on your show. I've been following Pine and what you created, like the analytics power force that you've brought into being, and that's amazing. And I'm maybe about like so I'm working as an ecosystem lead and governance researcher for Flipside Crypto. Um, I'm responsible in parts for near ecosystem and then doing governance research pieces for various platforms. Recently, we've made a report for DYDX that it's gonna come out pretty shortly, like in the next 1 or 2 weeks. And then I was a delegate in MakerDAO for a long time. MakerDAO started out as a research project for Flipside, but then we kind of fit in very well with the community there, and that led to a pretty sizable delegation by the co-founder. And yeah, so kind of mixed roles at Flipside, which is what keeps it interesting, and like no day is the same as the one before, just the way I like it. And I'm super bullish about DAOs. I think DAOs are like this new organizational paradigm that's going to take over the world, or at least parts of it that matter. And yeah, I think that's probably enough of an intro.
All right. Well, I kind of wanted to start diving into like professional delegation. So like a lot of people don't know what professional delegation is. And so you've been kind of working on that. So I'd love for you to talk about kind of what it is and kind of why you think it's important.
Sure. So professional delegation or paid delegation is a concept that actually MakerDAO pioneered. And maybe to explain why this matters is I have to zoom out a little bit. And like a lot of tokens give the token holders governance rights. And the idea behind that was that token holders have this natural alignment to contribute to governance in the protocols that where they hold the tokens, because then they can decide the direction or the organization takes and make sure that their tokens appreciate in value, right? So that was the theory, and a lot of in the, like 2017 ICO craze, like a lot of projects like slapped on governance rights to their token because it's pretty cheap to build. There's a couple of template smart contracts that you can use, and like so it's not difficult to build that. And the theory was that users will contribute and will contribute a lot of value, and at least from a theoretical point of view, that sounded really good, and people really wanted that. So it turns out, like fast forward 2 or 3 years, that actually just a very tiny percentage of token holders really contribute to governance. And the reasons are manifold, but I would say the main reason is that people just don't have that bandwidth and time to dedicate to like DAOs, and people would hold like 10 or 15 different tokens. And I think to contribute meaningfully to governance is like it's a job. It's like it requires a certain time commitment. And if you contribute to 15 DAOs governance, then I think you have like 2 full-time jobs at least, at the very least. And so I think people already have a job, and they have this bag of tokens and they don't participate. So MakerDAO then toyed with the idea of delegation, and delegation means that these token holders can basically delegate their voting power to these entities that are saying, hey, we are going to do governance on your behalf, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. We're going to read through all the proposals. We're going to make sure that the right stuff happens. We're going to hold people accountable, and you just delegate us the power. But then it turns out that delegates also need to make a living, and if you don't pay them, then this can only ever be like the second or third priority over like a breadwinning job, except for like a very small clientele of people who do it just for the sake of doing it and are like financially independent or don't have to work anymore. And so Maker then introduced the concept of delegate compensation. And it basically meant as soon as delegates participated above a certain percentage, a very high percentage of votes, I think it was like starting at 70 and then upwards of 90% of votes, you got the full compensation. You're entitled to this compensation, and the compensation was tied to the amount of governance tokens that were delegated to you. So the more people delegated to you, the more you earned. And this turned out to work pretty well, I'd say, because the pay was actually quite good. So like the top of the line delegates received 12,000 DAI a month as compensation. And of course, this is not like a Wall Street salary, but I think like in most countries, I'd say actually in all countries you can have a comfortable life with 12K. And maybe like in cities like New York or London, you can earn better in other professions, but then like it at least allowed you to dedicate a certain amount of time to the prospect of governing MakerDAO. And I think that introduced the concept of like paid delegation that attracted professional delegates, and it also attracted these governance organizations like Flipside Crypto, like Stable Labs, GFX, Wallfacer. There's a couple of them now that just are focused solely on governance and make a living by receiving either grants or delegate compensation.
Yeah. So you talked in there about like not a lot of participation from many users in DAOs. So like, how do you think the professional delegators have been helping out with that? And it's been mostly like smaller or larger users that have been working with professional delegates?
So that's a great question. So I think professional delegates did help a lot in Maker. Like, Maker had a big issue with passing these executive proposals, and passing the executive proposals means a certain amount of MKR of the governing token have to support it to reach quorum and get into effect. And the reason you need this threshold is because if the threshold is low, then governance attacks are cheaper. So you want the threshold to be as high as possible. But it can only be high if you have high participation. And in the delegate system, the threshold was routinely around like 100K MKR of support. And so an attacker would have to buy like 110, 120, 130K MKR to mount a malicious attack or to ram a malicious proposal through. And that's a lot of money. And so that never happened. So I think it worked really well. And I think in terms of delegation, we've seen some small token holders delegate, but the biggest chunks of delegated MKR was from huge token holders like Rune Christensen, the co-founder, Nikolai, another co-founder, A16Z.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So another thing I wanted to talk about is like, how do you contrast DAO governance with corporate governance, and like, what are the pros and cons for the stakeholders?
Yeah, good question. I think they're quite different. Because I think in corporate governance, you have these bodies, like clearly defined and very tightly gated bodies that are responsible for setting the agenda, for holding people accountable. So you have like the C-suite management, and then you have like the board, and these organizations, like these bodies, then govern the corporation. And in DAOs, it's very different. It's permissionless, basically, right? So like, and we've seen that in Maker. Like, we came in with people didn't know us. We didn't ask anybody. We just put up a delegate platform, started to contribute, started to make an impact, and then a lot of delegation followed suit because people saw that we were actually delivering value to the ecosystem. And so I think the amazing strong point of DAOs is that you can really have very fluid leadership. You don't have these kind of formalized roles, and people can come in and out as they want, and that creates a lot of flux and chaos, I'd say, but it also allows a lot of initiatives to gain momentum very quickly. And I think if you look at the whole research that's out there about decentralized organizations and servant leadership and agile organizations, then you see a certain tendency of decision making being pushed out to the edges. And the reason I think organizations want that is that usually, if you think about the organization as an organism, then the edges are like the sensory apparatus, right? Like this is where the rubber hits the road. So like the guy who's let's say you have like a burger joint, and the guy who's like flipping the burger patties, he will most likely be the one who knows exactly how to do that well. He knows exactly what in the kitchen can help him to be able to have like the best possible throughput, and he can probably tell you if the meat is great or if the meat isn't great, and like if that's and so I think in the right kind of organization you kind of find the structures to utilize that kind of input and these people and what they notice. And I think DAOs are very conducive to that. Like this, it's very easy for groups that are saying like, hey, we notice there's an opportunity here and we're gonna run with it. And then they just make a proposal, hey, we need X amount of funds or X amount of people, and then we can do this, and then it happens, and so on and so forth. So in theory, it would allow organizations to be extremely nimble and extremely adaptable, and also extremely interconnected with their context in the world that they meet.
Yeah. So you started off this interview talking about how you thought DAOs would like take over the world, and so do you think DAOs are going to replace like current governance structures, or do you think they're going to add governance where there wasn't governance before?
I think both in parts. So like I think that was kind of tongue in cheek. I think just given the regulatory landscape and the speed with which organizational paradigms change, I think this is just going to be like a subset of the whole that's going to embrace this new paradigm that DAOs can offer. But there, I think both. It will be like that some organizations will find out that it's better for them to organize in that way. Like we've seen that with, I think Agile was like the last big push in like organizational paradigm change, where organizations started to go like, oh, actually, we want to start building our products like that because we get better results. And now I think DAOs will be another subset of organizations that will embrace that paradigm. And then I think one of the strong suits of DAOs is that it allows people to organize so quickly, right? Like I'm in Germany. I know people in the States, I know people in Asia, I know people in Africa, and then we could get together and say like, hey, we want to do that. And we can very quickly form this DAO, create a multi-sig, create a governance, like install or deploy a governance contract. And then we have an organization with funded by international people from all over the world that's up and running. And I think the whole process would take like a day or two, right? And if you imagine what it would take to do that in the traditional paradigm, then I think this is like, you would need so much money, like just the contract work about like, okay, how would I even do that? I would have to have like a global seat of the corporation. So, okay, I would need to do that in some kind of tax optimized location like Zug or Geneva or whatever, and then I would have to form a subsidiary in every country, and the subsidiary would have to incorporate. And like 3 years later, and 2.5 million in lawyer fees, I could start working, right? Like so,
Yeah.
it's I'd rather deploy the 2.5 mil and actually build stuff, right? At least
Yeah,
that's my
100%.
thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess going back to the topic of delegators, like what do you think makes the difference between a good and bad delegator? Because it seems like most of these proposals are just first trying to get people to participate, but like what is like kind of the next level of like a productive delegate?
So I think for like a good delegate, I think like the two you touched upon activity, and I think this is really number one. Like a good delegate should participate in the DAO, and it sounds so simple, but that's not always the case. Like we see delegates that are like they show up every second sunny day and that's it. And so I think really committing to that and saying like I'm going to contribute to that to this DAO, and I'm going to show up on the forums, I'm going to read what's going on, reply to proposals that I think have merit, make sure this whole governance process moves along, make proposals for improvement, form connections to outside actors, maybe initiate some DAO to DAO partnerships. I think that's where it gets even better if you have delegates that kind of have multiple touch points in the industry and then are able to go out and say like, okay, this might be a good collaboration, or this might be a good collaboration, or I'm going to call this guy because he can present something that I know is valuable for the DAO. And this is, I think, then the next level. But the basis of a good delegate is participation, paying attention, showing up, and being there for the DAO. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. So you've done work across like a bunch of different chains. Have you noticed any differences in how people interact with, like, I guess governance, but all sorts of crypto stuff across the different chains you've worked with, or has it been like pretty similar?
So I think there's different stages of maturity. So I think like there's initially a lot of DAOs are very simple in the sense that it's basically Discord and a multisig, right? And then in a way, I think that's already pretty functional paradigm that you can have like Discord emoji polls or something, and then the multisig signers have to follow through with the decision of the token holders. And then you go into this, okay, there's an actual on-chain governance, and then there's these like more mature DAOs like MakerDAO or Aave who then start to kind of play around with or optimism that have like more complex governance structures where you have like councils or different houses or advisory councils with MakerDAO. So I think as DAOs mature and they have more participants, then they start to realize that it's no longer possible that everybody talks about everything, but you need to kind of scope these discussions and let people gravitate to where they are best. And I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So MakerDAO is one of like the oldest and probably one of the biggest DAOs. So like what have you like kind of learned being in the room, like in helping out with the decision making, and like I guess for like people who are thinking about starting DAOs or are early in the stages of DAOs, like what kind of teachings have you got from MakerDAO?
Yeah, good question. So I do think that MakerDAO, as you said, is one of the oldest DAOs, and I think in terms of maturity, it has already faced a lot of problems that other DAOs are going to face just in a year or two. And I think there's a couple of things that you need to watch out for. And one is, I think, that's inherent in every organization, not DAOs, but everywhere. And that's what I think the co-founder of Maker called like this iron law of bureaucracy. And the iron law of bureaucracy is that in the beginning you have some bureaucracy because you need some administration. And the administration is super clean and simple, and it's focused, and it's actually doing stuff that enables the organization to move ahead faster. But then it develops a certain kind of administrative class, and this administrative class is thinking about how to improve administration and bureaucracy, and before you notice it, it starts to have this kind of inward focus where you improve or expand bureaucracy for the sake of expanding it. So basically, administration is focusing on its own agenda instead of the goals of the wider organization. And keeping that aligned is actually extremely difficult, and it's even more difficult. Like, I think it's difficult in a traditional company, and we've seen that in countless organizations. And it's even more difficult in DAOs, because very often this professional workforce has a large advantage over the average token holder, that they are paid by the DAO, so they have all day. They can present their agenda and further their goals. And at the same time, they are also much better informed about like the ins and outs of the DAO, so it can sound very authoritative. But I think in the end, governance needs to have a feedback algorithm where you constantly evaluate, okay, we have this proposal, and we passed this proposal because we wanted to achieve X. Are we achieving X? Okay, let's say we're achieving X. Good. What's the side effects? Okay. Oh, we didn't actually notice that. Now we have to put that into focus and say, like, okay, we achieved X, but now we also do Y, and does that make sense, or do we need to go back to the step we were before? And I think that's something that you see across the board in every organization, where processes just get layered and layered and layered on top of each other. And there comes a point where these processes are so burdensome that the whole organization is actually suffering because of this bureaucratic burden. And I think DAOs have to be very aware that this tendency exists, and have to constantly nip it in the bud, and like saying, constantly reevaluate. Okay, we added another process. Does it make sense? Can we kill another process that we had before, so that the whole thing stays lean, right? Because I think what you want and what attracts people to DAOs is this ability to just go and run with things, to be creative, to be like this kind of liberal atmosphere of doing and building. I think that's what keeps people excited about DAOs, and I think you want to keep that at any price, actually. So I think that's an area that's super tough to monitor, because it's a creeping thing, right? It's not like, this proposal is where it starts. It's like one after the other, and everything is well meant, well intentioned, everything makes sense. But then you look back half a year and you notice, actually, we're at a very different space now. And
you definitely have me thinking about you definitely have me thinking about like governments and different corporations and stuff. But DAOs definitely have a unique opportunity to kind of get rid of a lot of that, because a lot of the stuff is transparent. But yeah, you're right. They definitely got to keep looking for it.
Yeah.
So I guess zooming out a little bit, kind of towards the crypto space as a whole, like, what has you excited? Like, what things are you kind of looking forward to? Are you interested in, or I don't know, just overall, like, in the crypto space?
Totally. This is a super good question. I think especially now in the kind of bear market that we're in, and it's I think sometimes it seems like all these things, like, we take them for granted, and it's like, the next DeFi protocol, yawn. But I think if you put it into the context of the wider world, this is all still extremely new. And I still think that the basic push that started with Bitcoin is still what gets me excited about crypto, and that's this push about like disintermediation and sovereignty. I think those two things are like what really attracts me to this space. So the big lure of Bitcoin was that it was like you can be your own bank, right? Like, you don't need the central bank, because you can run a home miner and it'll mine a couple of Bitcoin, and that's money, right? And that's super powerful. And then DeFi would give you access to all these tools that only super sophisticated market makers in very protected, regulatory protected regimes could access. And now you have all these tools, and decentralized social networks. Like you can take, like Lens, for instance, is a perfect example. Take your social graph and just move it elsewhere. You know, you're not locked into our ecosystem, and we are constantly extracting as much value as we can. And so I think this basic push about disintermediation, bringing the first and the last part of the market together very directly, that's super powerful, and that's what I'm super excited about still.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think this is a great place to end things off, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks a lot, Jack. That was a pleasure.
Yeah.